Well, good afternoon again, everybody, and welcome back to the latest instalment of the TechnoLive starter sessions. I hope everybody is keeping well. And this is actually our last TechnoLive starter session before Christmas. So I hope everyone is looking forward to the Christmas holidays as well. So for those of you who don't know me already, my name is Dan and I work for Technocamps in Bangor. And assisting me today is one of my colleagues, Andy. So between us we are here to help throughout with any questions that you might have during today's live stream. And of course, I will start off by just explaining how we can help you. But before we do that, I'd like to give a little bit of an introduction as to what we'll be doing today. And during today's live stream, we're actually going to be continuing with the theme of block-based programming, but using a new platform that we haven't come across before called Gamefroot. Now, some of you might be familiar with Gamefroot already, especially if you have been in previous coding club sessions or have looked back through previous TechnoCamps live streams on our YouTube channel. But our theme for today's session is going to be based around block-based programming and building up what would essentially be a template for what could be a much bigger game should you choose to continue developing it. And for anyone who is watching who is from the coding club, in the new year this website will be what we're using as the basis for our next set of coding clubs. Okay, so we're going to be using Gamefroot, and we'll be developing a game on Gamefruit. And if anybody is interested in wanting to sign up to our coding clubs, please check or get your parents to check our social media pages, or do get in touch with us today. And as usual, the way in which you can get in touch with us is via the TechnoCamps website, which is now looking brand new. We have had a completely new website and it is looking absolutely fantastic. But the approach for contacting us is exactly the same. So down in the right hand side of the screen here is the same symbol as before, which is of course used to contact us if you need any help. Like I said, both myself and my colleague Andy are available should you need a hand with anything. And feel free to have a little bit of an explore of our new website. It is looking fantastic, and it's got a really good modern feel to it. It's looking really, really good. And of course, remember, bearing in mind, I've mentioned before, all of the information about our competitions that we are running / are involved with are available on the TechnoCamps website as well. We've got the Welsh Rugby Union Club of the Future competition information here. Okay, so if anyone wants to have a go with that, or would like any help in getting involved with that, then do let us know. And of course as well, although the link is let's see if we can find it here. We have of course got our Game of Codes Education of the Future competition as well. So if anybody is interested and would like a little bit more information about that, or wants something to do over the Christmas holidays, then as well remember you can get in touch with us about that as well. Okay, so the competition for the Game of Codes competition, finishes on the 19th of February. So you've got plenty of time and maybe something to do over the Christmas holidays. So without further ado, we'll get started on our session today, which is of course going to be on Gamefruit. Now, if you're familiar with Gamefruit already, or have maybe already signed up to Gamefruit's website, I would recommend that you log in now. Alternatively, if you haven't yet already got an account, I would recommend that you maybe set one up, but of course you don't necessarily have to. Okay, you don't have to set up an account if you don't want to. It's completely up to you. So I'm going to set. I am signed in. However, I will show the two ways in which you can set up a basic game, or like a starting template. Let's just say either with or without an online account. Okay. Now, if you go onto Google and type in Gamefroot, or go to the make.gamefroot.com website, okay, which hopefully you'll be able to see in my URL bar, you'll be brought to this website here, and you'll hopefully all see a screen that is indeed similar to mine. Now, if you are signed in, if you select Start Creating, which is this big button here, you'll get taken to this screen. And you'll be able to see that there are numerous different options, there are numerous templates and different tutorials that you can follow. However, for the purposes of today's session, I'm going to be clicking on New Blank Game. And this will bring up eventually this screen here. Okay. Now, if you're not signed in, you will notice that when you click Start Creating, things look a little bit different, and you can see that some of the tutorials are greyed out, but I believe you might, sometimes you're still able to do some of them. But what you need to select is the big green Starter Platform Activity button at the top of the screen. And then you can simply close these tutorials. And what I would recommend, unless you want to read them of course, and then what I would suggest that you do after that is right click on all of these layers, sorry, apologies, not right click, click on the three dots for all of these layers and just remove all of them. Delete and delete. And then you will end up in exactly the same screen as what I'm on now. Okay? So I'm going to be using the my online account version so that I can see the same thing as everybody who's signed in, but the process of building and developing a game will be very much the same regardless as to whether or not you're signed in or not. Okay, and one thing as well that's important to remember is that if you are signed in to your online account, you are actually able to download or save your games to your online account. If you're not signed in, you're only able to download them to your local machine. So I'll go through all of that again at the end, but if you do have an online account, it is beneficial because it means that you don't have to download your game every time you need to every time you want to save it. So it's similar in a way to Scratch. Now, I'll just give everybody an opportunity to get to the same place as me. Remember, if you do need any help with getting set up or getting to this stage, do let us know. Okay, so remember, if you are watching, even if you are watching this live, you can still pause the video if you do need a little bit of extra time getting set up, but we will carry on. So I will give a quick run through as to what all of these different settings mean. Okay, as you can see, there are lots and lots of different buttons and things running along different parts of the screen. So I will give a little bit of a crash course as to what each one of the buttons means and what we can do with them. Okay, so first thing that you have is the file option. This allows us to save our games to our online accounts. We can export them, which means downloading them to our computers, and importing them, which means that we would be able to import the game from our computer to Gamefroot. So again, if you don't have an online account and you would like to save a copy of your game at the end of this session, these are the two options that you will require. If you do have an online account, however, you can still do this, but I would recommend that you save the game to your online account, because then that way it's permanently there type thing. And it will save the more, you can save the more recent versions as you're going along. We have got a couple of other options, so we've got undo and redo buttons here, which are also available here as well, these two buttons here. We can leave everything under view as it is, and also I would recommend that if anybody does have any free time over the holidays and is interested in maybe having a look at Gamefroot, there are numerous different tutorials available that can help you build, you know, games from basic starter projects right the way up to kind of quite intermediate platformer games. So I would definitely suggest that you take a look at some of those. So we've got some other options here. Things like game settings allows us to rename our game. So I'll just call mine Technocamps game, and you can change the screen size as well, or the game size I should say. There are ways in which you can adjust these, but it is okay to leave them as they are. So I've now renamed my game. Now the levels that we have here, they're similar to levels that you would have in an ordinary game, and we can add levels and remove levels and things like that. But what I would suggest for today is that we keep the one level, because each level can be thought of as a different stage. So one level could be our main menu, and then we could have another level which is maybe the first level of our game. Maybe we've got another level which is our second level of our game, and then we might have a level that represents our winning screen and a level that represents our game over screen. So there are different, every level doesn't necessarily mean a level of the game, but it represents a different stage of the game. Okay. Now this is our toolbar. So if you want to move around in the world or in your map, you will need to click on the hand symbol and drag yourself around your platforming zone here, which is this part in the middle. There's also the eraser symbol so that you can delete objects. We've got the text box symbol. The paintbrush symbol allows you to edit objects once they are part of your game. And then of course you've got the mouse, which allows you to select things. And you can also navigate around your game and zoom in and out of your game using the toolbar, which is located at the bottom of the screen, this sort of secondary toolbar which is down here at the bottom of the screen. Now, in addition to that, we've also got this layers section. Now, the layers section is, as the name suggests, made up of where we've got various different layers within our world. Okay, now I will go through which layers that we need to add and explain in a little bit more detail what they are in a second, but I'm going to just kind of leave that there for now as something that we'll come back to. Over on the left of the screen, we have got numerous different things. You know, we've got things like the market, the character creator, creating animations, uploading media. These things are aspects that you can do for your games if you wanted to. Okay, you can create your own characters and animations and things like that. The code section is also something that we'll be using today, as this is where all of our scripts are going to be, and these scripts are very similar to what we would see in Scratch, okay, as we'll see in a second. And then the levels menu is simply where we can find the settings for all of our different levels. Now again, this isn't something that you need to necessarily worry about today, but if you were interested in further, you know, advancing with your games, you could do that using the levels menu. Now, as you can see at the moment, it says this game is empty, and there are options for you to do things like start the tutorials, but I'm going to give a little bit of a introduction myself here today as to how we can program our games and things like that. And then what we'll do afterwards is we will have a little bit more of a play with Gamefroot and see what we can add to our games once we've got a bit of a basic structure for it. Now, the first thing that we need to do is we actually need to add what they call a pack, and the purpose of this is that it gives us some things like some characters and some obstacles and things like that that we can use within our game. Now, if we go to the Explore Market option, there are quite a few different options. I believe there are some that you need to pay for, possibly. I'm not 100% sure, but the one that we'll be using today is a free version. So when you see the marketplace, if you scroll down, you should find this sort of pale or light blue coloured file down here. And if you select that, you will see that there are many different objects available that we can have within our game. And what I would like you to do is select this Get It for Free option, okay, or Get for Free. It will then say Adding to Pack, and what you'll then notice is that we have got all of these different options here that we can now incorporate into our game. And this includes things like level, details, different tiles for our character to walk on, different obstacles, and players and things like that, okay? Now, the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually add our layers. Now, I mentioned earlier about these layers, and the purpose of the layers is that each layer will represent a particular section of our game. Now, currently, I've got just the background layer. If you have got the background layer, you can leave it. You can leave it there because we will be using it. However, if the background layer isn't there, we simply click on this plus symbol and choose Add New Layer. Okay. Now, there are two versions. There are two different types of layers. We have got the new layer and we've got the new tile map. Now, the tile map is useful for the floor that your character is going to walk on. So I'm going to select the new tile map, and you can see now that I've got this grid-like system, and I'm actually going to rename my tile map. So I'm going to double click on it and I'm going to call this floor. So we're going to just give it a meaningful name so that we can remember the purpose of it, okay? Now we also, so far we've got a layer for our background and we've got a layer for our floor, but what we also need to do is have a layer for our characters. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the plus symbol, and this time I'm not going to use a tile map, I'm just going to use a new layer, because the tile map is there to give us more of a precise placement of objects, and we don't really, in terms of the characters, we want to be able to place them wherever we want within our game. So I'm going to add a new layer and I'm going to call this one Characters. And finally, I also need a layer for various objects that are going to be in my game. So this could be things like obstacles or possibly some NPCs or anything like that. So again, I'm going to add a new layer and I'm going to call it Obstacles. Or objects. Obstacles or objects is up to you. So, I've now got all of my layers, and these 4 layers alone can be used to make up quite a detailed game. Okay, you don't necessarily need more. You can add more if you want to, if you find that you need them. But for the purposes of this game, 4 layers will be enough. One thing I should point out is that when you are editing your game, you will need to make sure that you've selected the correct layer for what you need to do. So if I wanted to add floor to my game, I need to make sure that I've selected the floor layer, because otherwise it's not going to register as being in the correct place, because each one of these layers represents one thing on top of the other. So if I was to potentially move the background layer to the top, it could appear like my background is in front of other things. So we don't necessarily want that to happen. So always make sure that you have selected the layer which you need for what you're trying to do. So now that we've got our different layers and we've got our packs to add all of our different assets, we now need to actually start constructing our game. So the first thing I think I'm going to do is supply a bit of a background to the game. So I'm going to click on the background layer, and over on the left of the screen in the media tab, if I scroll down a little bit, you'll notice that there are a series of backgrounds, and this should look the same on your screen as well. Okay. Now the background that you choose is completely up to you. I'm going to go with this background here, I think. So I'm going to click it, and I'm just simply going to drag it to the top left-hand corner of my of the window where my game is going to be displayed. And I'm going to just left-click once to release it. So left-click once to select it on the object, and then simply drag it and left-click again to release it. So I'll just give everybody a chance to do that first. Remember, you can pause the video if I'm not giving enough time between each task. And of course, remember, if you do need help, we are here if you need it. Okay, so now that we've added our background, I feel like we might need a little bit of a floor for our playable character to walk on, because at the moment they'll just be falling to infinity. You know, they'll just keep on going forever and ever, and they won't be able, and it won't stop. So we need a solid floor for our characters to walk on. So I'm going to select my floor layer. As you can see now, it's brought back the grid system. And I'm going to, again, making sure that all of these layers are in the correct order, I am going to bring in some floor. Now, the floor is also referred to as tiles. And if you scroll down right to the bottom of the of your pack, you should find that there are a series of obstacles. Okay, or sorry, tiles. And again, the tiles that you choose are up to you. Okay, it doesn't matter which ones. I'm going to choose this slightly lighter coloured greener grass here. Again, I'm going to select it using the mouse, and then if I hold down left mouse and drag, you can see that the floor is joining itself together, and each tile fits quite neatly into each one of the squares, so we can provide a bit of more of an accurate grid layout. Okay, now if you do go beyond the background, that is okay. Okay, you don't need to worry if you go slightly beyond the background, because in a second we'll be programming our background to move with our playable character. Now, as you can see, the background that I've given my character a bit of a floor, okay, some tiles to walk on. Now, you can design any kind of map that you like. It doesn't necessarily have to look like mine. I'm just, again, giving a bit of a basic example of what you could include. Now, you can also, remember, if you do make a mistake, you can delete using the eraser symbol. So if I wanted to delete these, I can simply select the eraser symbol from the toolbar and left click over each one. End up with something like that. Okay. So I've given my game some floor, but of course I also need a character to be able to actually navigate around my game, because at the moment there is no playable character. Okay, there's nothing to actually do in the game at the moment. So I'm going to click onto my characters layer, and I'm going to go back over to my pack on the left of the screen, and if I scroll to this section, which is the players section, there are a series of different players that we can select. Okay, and it doesn't matter which one you want to choose, it's entirely up to you. I'm going to go with, who should we go with? I'm going to go with, let's go with this person. So I'm going to, again, left click, drag them in, and place them wherever I want them to be. So I'm just going to place them there. Okay, and we can see now that I've got, again, making sure that I'm on the characters layer, I have now placed my playable character in the game. Okay, so again, I'll just give everybody a few seconds to do that, but again, remember, if you do need to pause the video, feel free to do so. Okay, so up in the top right hand corner of the screen there are three different icons. Now the one at the end with the letter D in it, that is just the account details. Okay, so you don't need to worry about that one. This green symbol here, or this green box, is where you'll be able to find the share or remix link to your game. So if you wanted to be able to share your game with others, you can use that facility, kind of like how you can in Scratch. However, this orange play button, if I click it, it launches a window like this one, where our game is essentially rendered. And there are different options available. Okay, we've got things like the sort of debugging mode type thing, and we've got, you know, the restart option and things like that, and the option to close it. But you'll be able to see your game. Now currently I'm pressing different keys on the keyboard. You might be able to hear it through the microphone, and nothing is happening. And that is because we've not actually done any sort of programming yet to get our game to actually do anything. So as it currently stands, the game is completely stuck. Okay, there's nothing for it to do. It's just going to remain frozen. So we need to be able to program our game so that it can actually start doing some things. Just going to adjust the background a little bit because I noticed it was slightly off. There we go. Now, for today's session, I will be programming both the playable character as well as the background animation. Okay, but there are numerous different tutorials available that you can use that will help teach you how to actually program things slightly further. So I can't quite remember all of the tutorials available, but if I remember correctly, there are tutorials on how to program things like NPCs, how to program objects, how to program start menus, and how to program game over screens and things like that. Okay, there are lots of different tutorials out there, but for today we'll just be doing some basic programming to control the movement of our playable character, and also to control our background so that it follows the playable character as we're going through the game. Now, there are different ways in which we can create scripts. Now, the first way that we can do it is that we can actually go to the code section on our screen up here, and we can select the add new script option. Okay, and again, I'll go through this coding window in just a second. The alternative option is if you wanted to add scripts to a particular object, instead of creating them and then manually assigning the script, you can simply right click on the object in which you would like to program, hover your mouse over the name of the object, and then select the Add Script option. Or alternatively, you can click on these two at this little sort of purpley pink circle here, and again click on Add Script, and that will take us through to this window here. Now, a lot of you might be already quite familiar with this type of coding window, especially those of you who have followed previous live streams or who have been involved with Scratch projects or in the coding club, in the Techno Club. Some of you might have already become familiar with this particular kind of layout, okay? And some of you might have noticed as well that there are even Scratch blocks that you can use, okay? So we're not going to be using all of these Scratch blocks, but we will be using some of them, or you might find yourself using some of them in a little while. Now, this window or this layout follows a very similar pattern to Scratch. So along the left of the screen you've got all of the different menus. Now, of course, these have different names to the ones that we see in Scratch, but they follow a similar process where each one has its own unique set of blocks. And some of them might look a little bit confusing and might not make a lot of sense, but again, we'll be talking through some of them today, and the tutorials that are available will also help if you're not sure about anything, okay? So in the middle of the screen here we have our coding zone. We've also got the option to drag blocks into the bin, which is in the bottom right of the screen, or alternatively you can drag them to the left of the screen as well. And you can also zoom in and out as well of the block. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit to make things a little bit clearer. Now, one thing I would suggest as well is that you rename each one of your scripts so that it is related to the character or to the object in question. Now, if you do forget to do this, it does prompt you when you try and exit the script that you haven't saved it and that you need to give it a name. But if you want to rename it from the start, I would just simply click on this untitled text up here. Simply double click on it, sorry, and then you can type in the name of your script. So I'm going to call this one character, because it's going to be my character script, and it's going to have all of the movement and all of the code that's needed to program my playable character. So again, I'll give everybody just 1 or 2 minutes or a few seconds just to get to this stage, and then we'll actually start the process of programming our character. Again, we are here to help if you need it, so feel free to post something in the talk, in the chat facility, which is of course available on the TechnoCamp's website. Okay, so we now need to start adding a few blocks that are actually going to control our character. And the first thing that we need to do is make sure that the game's camera is constantly following our playable character as we move through the game. And to do that, we're going to use a form of looping. So from the events menu, we can find this constantly block. I'm going to click and I'm going to drag that into my coding zone. Now, remember, looping is a way of getting our programs to constantly run or continuously run a piece of code over and over again. It doesn't have to be forever. It can be a set number of times, it can be until a certain condition is true, but in this case it's going to be run constantly, which is basically similar to the forever loop that we can find in Scratch. Now, there is a block that controls the movement of the camera in the game, and if I go to the Looks menu and I scroll through the Looks menu, you'll be able to find under Camera Lock this block here, which is Center Camera on Myself. Now, when it says on myself, this always means to the object in which you are programming. So in this case, it is myself is referring to the character. And I'm just going to pop those two blocks together so it looks a little bit like that. Now, there are some elements of the game that we need to, or some elements of code that we need to add to help make our game slightly more realistic. Now, when I say realistic, I mean you can be as creative as you like with your games, okay? However, I am going to apply gravity to my game. Now again, this isn't something that you feel like, you might not feel like you have to do it. You might decide that you want to maybe do some kind of space game. But it's always a good idea to have some gravity enabled, even if it's just not particularly powerful gravity. So I am going to go to events, and I'm going to use this when the level starts block. So what this means is that every time the level now starts, I am going to be turning on gravity. Okay, so the way in which we can do that is from the physics menu, which is applicable since gravity of course is related to physics. We can actually use this set gravity x 0 block. So drag that and pop it in there. Now of course, for those of you who are familiar with graphs and things like that, you'll remember that the x-axis is what runs from left to right, and the y-axis is what goes from top to bottom. And so, since gravity happens in a broad sense from top to bottom, okay, it's of course it's pulling things down, we need to change our gravity to being y, because it's not dragging us left and right, it's dragging us down. So we therefore need to set gravity to being y. Now, at the moment, we've got 0 gravity, which of course isn't ideal in this case, since it looks like our character is running through the mountains. So I've found that a good value to assign gravity is around 1,200, and that's a more realistic sort of strength to the gravity within the bounds of the game. Okay. Now, of course, at the moment, even though we've got gravity turned on, our character isn't able to react to it until we tell them to. So again, from the physics menu, we can find a block, and it might take me some scrolling to find it. So underneath the miscellaneous menu, we can find a block that says set reacts to gravity true. And what this block is essentially now saying is that we've got gravity enabled, but we want our character to be able to react to that gravity. Okay? Now, in addition to having these things happen, when our character is wandering through the game, it might look occasionally like they are jumping backwards and forwards as you change direction. And there is a simple block available to prevent this from happening, but until I share it, I will demonstrate what I mean once we get once I've actually finished programming the character to be able to move. Now, like in Scratch, we can program our sprites to move using different keys on the keyboard, and I would like to use the left, right and up arrows to control my character in the game. So there is, from the events menu, a block called when \delete is pressed. and I'm going to click and drag that into the game. Now, currently, of course, it's set to backspace/delete, but I would like it to be up, down, up, left, and right. So I'm going to change mine. So I'm going to say right, and then if you right-click on that block, you can actually duplicate it. So I'm going to have one set to right arrow, one set to left arrow, and one set to the up arrow. Again, it is completely up to you how you which buttons you prefer. Some of you might want to use the space bar for jumping. Some of you who have done lots of gaming before on PC might prefer to use WASD on the keyboard. Okay, it is entirely up to you what buttons you would like to have as your main control buttons. Now, we need to be able to make our character move within the game. And the way in which we can do that is we can set their velocity. So velocity is essentially like speed, and we need to be telling our game how quickly we'd like our characters to move in a particular direction when we're pressing our chosen arrow keys. Now, from the physics menu, there is a block called set velocity x0. Now I'm going to drag that in, and I'm also going to duplicate that to being in all of my other blocks, so that the velocity is set for each and every one of the buttons. Now, how quickly you would like your character to move is up to you. A good running speed is normally around 300 units. So I'm going to set 300 units to move to the right. But because we'll be moving in the opposite direction when we say that the left arrow is being pressed, I'm going to set the left arrow's x velocity to being minus 300. Because this means that instead of moving 300 units to the right, we're moving to the left instead. Okay, so it's essentially, you can think of it as we're moving backwards through the level. Now with the up arrow, some of you might have noticed that our velocity is currently set to x, and of course the up arrow is being used for jumping, which means we're moving up and down. And therefore, like with gravity, we need to change the velocity to being the y velocity, because this means that we'll be controlling the up and down movement of the character. And around minus 500 units is a good jumping height to kind of detract away from the strength of the gravity. Okay? So I'll just leave those on the screen for a second or two. Okay, so now that we've set our velocity, we also need to have our character do some kind of animation, because if I hit the play button currently, so it will prompt you, as it says on my screen, about saving changes, so I'm going to say yes, and then again you can specify the name. I'm just going to hit save. It might take a little while to load, but currently when I'm pressing the arrow keys, there's no animation, and when I press the buttons, my character doesn't stop moving. So even when I release the buttons, my character doesn't stop moving, they keep on going. So we'll program in a second how we can stop that. However, I think to make things look a little bit more interesting, we're going to want to set some animations. So to do that, I'm going to go to the animation menu, and I'm going to select the play animation button. Now a lot of the characters within Gamefroot have got animations that are already associated with them, but you might want to specify some of your own animations and create your own animations if you're creating your own characters. So again, I'm going to say select animation. I'm going to duplicate that to put into left arrow and duplicate it again to go into the up arrow. Now, a lot of the animations, like I said, have already been predefined. Okay, and if I come out of the script for a second, if I right click on my character and go to edit animation, we can see that we've already got some predefined animations, things like run, jump, fall, and things like that. Okay, now we can set these animations to run within our game when we are pressing the arrow keys. So going back to the character script, we can name the animations that we want to run at a particular point. So when my right and left arrow keys are pressed, I want to have the run animation going. And of course, when I press the up arrow, I would like the jump animation to run. So now, again, if I run the game again, you can see that when I press the right arrow key now, the person runs. When I press the left arrow key, they look like currently they're running backwards, which isn't perfect. And if I press the jump arrow, you can see that the jump animation does play. Okay. Now, of course, the game is looking a little bit, let's say, buggy currently. Okay, there are still some things that we need to fix. And one of those things that you might have noticed is that when I press the left arrow key, the character looks as if they are still running in the same direction, even though they're moving backwards. And we can fix this by having our character's image flipped. And from the transform menu, there's a block called set X scale of myself to 1. Now, I only need to include this in the right and left arrow key blocks, okay? And the value 1 means that the character is facing to the right, but to flip them, if I say -1, it means that now there will be a flipped image of the character when I press the left arrow key. So again, I'm going to test that. Make sure that you are testing your games as you're going along to make sure that everything is working. And you'll notice now that when I press the right arrow key, again, my character still is running forever, but they're running in the correct direction. And when I change that to going to the left, they start running in the opposite, or look like they're running in the opposite direction. Okay? But there is a lot of jumping as I'm changing direction. And to prevent the jumping from happening, we can actually use a block, again from the transform menu, which is center anchor point of myself. And this will just prevent the character from jumping. It kind of anchors them down into one particular place. Now, there have, of course, been some, as I'm sure a lot of you saw, there's a few more bugs, I suppose we'd call them, that need to be fixed, where, of course, when I press the arrow key, the game is doing what it's supposed to. It is keeping my character running, but, of course, it might not be what we want our character to do. We want to be able to be holding down the button in order for that to allow our game to program the movement of the character. And what we can do is that we can say when we release a particular button, okay, we want our character to stop moving. So back inside of the events menu, we can go to the when \delete is pressed block. Can pop that there, and again we want to be saying that this is the right arrow. We want to duplicate it so that we've got one for when the left arrow is released, and we also want one for when the up arrow is released. And the way in which we can tell the game what to do when when these arrows are released is we can actually change the pressed section to being released. So each one can become released. And what happens now is, or what will happen in a second, is when we release the buttons, something else is going to happen. Okay? So what we need to specify is that when our buttons are released, that the velocity of the character actually then becomes 0 because we want them to stop moving. So again, from the physics menu, I can select the set velocity x to 0 block, and I can apply this to all of the other blocks. So I can say set velocity x 0 for the left arrow, and of course for the up arrow I can say the y velocity to 0, because of course the up arrow is controlling the up and down movement of the character. Now, if I hit the play button, some of you might notice that there is an undocumented feature, let's just call it, in the program where I'm pressing the arrow, my character isn't moving, but the animation is continuing to play. And of course this isn't something that we want to see happening, because in this case now they've frozen, as you can see, in that jumping motion, and it doesn't look particularly smooth. So we therefore need to tell our game, and at the moment the character is actually pushing the background away, which is something that we'll be fixing in a second as well. But currently our game is having our character look like they're running on the spot, and of course we want them to be standing still when they're not moving. So we can again add animations, so play animation, and we can leave it as idle. So now when and again we can duplicate this into each one of the blocks. So now when we release the arrow keys, we'll see in a second, I'm letting go of the arrow key and the character is stopping moving and they're just standing still. And I'm jumping, as you can see, and the character is standing still. Okay? So we've got some useful control movement there. And those are essentially the basics behind the way in which we can control our character. Okay? So we've set the velocity, so the speed in which the character moves, and again you can adjust this, to be whatever you want it to be. We've set how strong the gravity needs to be, we've set the animations, and of course you'll notice as well that the camera is actually following the player as they move through the level, which is of course what we need to happen, because otherwise we wouldn't know what we're doing. Now I'm going to close down that, and what I will do, I'll just leave this code on the screen for a second or two, just so that anyone who's not yet caught up can pause the video to have a chance to maybe take a screenshot of it or something like that if you need to see it, or to do something similar in your own code. So I'll just leave that there for a second or two. Okay, so I can exit out of this script by clicking on the arrow. It might prompt you again to save it, so just say yes. And now you'll notice as well that that script has now appeared as a jigsaw puzzle in my code section. And you can actually select that code, that jigsaw, if you hadn't already assigned it to your character sprite, and drag it over to your character sprite, and if you left click over the character, it will simply apply that code to the character. Okay? Now, some of you might have noticed earlier as well that the background was scrolling away as we were running through the game, and it was as if the character was essentially pushing it. Okay? Now, as you can see, this is why it's just to give a quick demonstration as to why the order of things is important. At the moment, my background is set to be the furthest, sort of the bottommost layer, so it is behind everything. If I was to move it to the top, you can see that it covers everything. Of course, we don't really want that for a background because it would sort of defeat the object. So we need to make sure that we can keep it behind everything. So this is just to emphasize why the order of these things is important. But like I said, we were probably, as a lot of you are probably noticing, and I'll give another quick demonstration, is that as I was playing through the game, I was moving my character. We can see there goes the character, and I get to here, and if I turn around and start walking in the opposite direction, my character starts pushing the background away, and it's kind of got a mind of its own, which isn't ideal. So we need to give our background its own script to keep it centered in one place and to follow us as we move through the game. So again, I'm going to add a new script. So I'm just going to click on the angled brackets, then the side of the purple circle up here, going to select add script. And once again, I'm going to be brought to another blank script screen. Now, I do need to rename my script like before, so remember, try and give it a meaningful name so that you remember what it's for. So I'm going to call this one background. And there are very, very little blocks of code needed for this script, but it's always, but they're really, really useful in ensuring that our background doesn't sort of run away from us as we're playing the game. So what I want to do is go once again, say when created. So this of course means when it's created, so when the level starts essentially. We want to set the physics, so from the physics menu, of our background to being false. So scrolling down, set physics enabled, we want to drag that into there, and we want to say that it's false. Now, what this is essentially doing is, as you saw earlier, when we were using our playing through the game, when we were holding down the left button when to move in the opposite direction, our sprite, I call it our sprite, our character I should say, was pushing the background in the opposite direction. And of course, we don't really want that to happen, so what we can actually specify is that the physics are that the background doesn't react to any physics, so it can't react to us pushing the background away. The background will just remain completely still, because otherwise it's using physics to push itself away, and we don't want that. Now, in addition, we need our camera to follow our character through the game. And the way that we can do that is by using a constantly loop. So again, using the constantly loop, we can specify that the position of the background is always in relation to our character, so that it always follows our character as we're going through the game. Now, from the transform menu, you should be able to find a block that says set X position of myself to 0. Okay, so you can probably see that up here. Now, of course, we need one of these blocks for both the X and Y axis. Okay, because otherwise it's going to be moving, we're going to be telling the background to move left and right and not up and down with us. So we can duplicate this block and set the second one to being for the Y position of myself. Now again, when it says myself, it means the background in this case, because it's the object that you are programming. Now, currently it's set to 0. Now, of course, this would mean that it would be at position 0, 0, which isn't something that we want it to be at. So I'm going to click and drag these, and I'm just going to throw them away. You know, you can take them to the left, or you can put them into the bin down the bottom there. And what I would like it to do is actually follow the game's camera, so that it's following essentially the player character as the game progresses. So from the looks menu, if you scroll down, you should be able to find this block, Camera X. And as I'm sure you've all guessed, we also need a Camera Y block. So what we now have for this script is a block that says the physics of the background are turned off, so it can't react to anything that the character does to it, and that it's going to be following the position of the camera as we're playing through the game. Okay, so again, it's not the position of the player that we're talking about here, but it's the position of the background that's going to be following the camera. Now if I hit the play button, it will again prompt you about changes. I'm going to say yes, and then save the script and say save. And then it'll take just a second for the game to load, and there it is. And we can see now that it's a little bit juddery, okay? However, the background now follows my character no matter where I go in the game. Okay, it continues to follow the character no matter where I go in the game, and therefore our script has been a success. Now, of course, you could do some repositioning of the background to maybe make it look a little bit smoother, but generally speaking, that is now complete. So we can click on the arrow, and that takes us back to our home screen. And again, we can see now that the background script has appeared in our list of code scripts that we've produced. Okay. So what we have managed to produce today is using 3 different objects in a way. We've got a background, a character, and also a series of tiles. We have managed to produce a basic game. Okay, we've got 4 different layers. I know we didn't make use of the obstacles layer, but that's because we haven't got any obstacles as of yet. But we've got 4 layers, and we've got 3 different assets from the pack that we've installed here, that we can use in the game. Okay, now if any of you wanted to take a look further at Gamefroot's various features, there is, of course, we are using, of course, the free version of Gamefroot here, but there are, I believe, a series of tutorials here. So there are different starter project tutorials. They've even got some hour of code tutorials, which, of course, we looked at before last week. With Minecraft. We've also got some intermediate resources where you can make your own platformers. Okay, there are lots and lots of different tutorials available, which you can use to help develop and build upon your games slightly further. So, as I said at the start of the live stream, this is actually the last TechnoLive starter session now until after the Christmas holidays. And after the Christmas holidays, we will be looking at a whole bunch of new things. Okay, so hopefully you're all looking forward to that. For anybody who is interested, remember this will actually be the website that we're using for our coding club sessions, so our TechnoClub sessions, which will be running after the Christmas holidays. That's the Wednesday sessions. They will be running after the Christmas holidays, and we will be using Gamefroot to build up a series of hopefully really interesting and new games. And of course, we will be doing adding a lot more features than what we've added today. But if anybody did want to continue to build on their games, the option is available, of course, to save your games. So I can save my game here, and it will save the game hopefully to my online account. So there we go, that's now saved to my online account. We've also got, of course, the option to export the game. You won't be able to export the game and play it, however. It will simply export it as what we call a JSON file, which you won't be able to play in sort of like from your machine, but you will be able to continue to edit it and play it online when you re-import it. Okay, so you'll be able to export it, and then when you want to continue editing it, or if you wanted to play on it, you could also import it. Okay, so that actually brings us through to the end of today's live stream. Okay, I'd like to thank you all very, very much for joining both myself and Andy during today's session. And I hope that you've enjoyed this first set of TechnoLive sessions. It's been, I've had a lot of fun producing these live streams. I hope you've all enjoyed watching them. And I think all that there is left for me to say is thank you very much to Andy for helping out today, and also thank you again to you all for joining, and have a great Christmas, and I will hopefully speak to you all very soon with our next new TechnoCamps live stream sessions in the new year. So take care everyone, have a good Christmas and have a happy new year.